Welcome to the Healthspan Collective, the podcast where science and wellness converge. I'm Nicole Doran, and I'm thrilled to have you join us as we dive into the world of regenerative medicine, integrative health, and the latest science and trends shaping how we live healthier for longer. Today we have Kevin Ferber. Kevin is the Chief Operating Officer at American Cell Technology, the largest personal stem cell bank in the U.S., where he drives innovation and partnerships in regenerative medicine. He recently led the launch of Vital Cells, the first U.S. newborn stem cell bank to offer children access to billions of their own live cells. With a decade-long passion for stem cells sparked by his experience as a two-time All-American athlete, Ferber is dedicated to advancing personal stem cell therapy and educating the medical community on its future potential. Hi, guys. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Good to be here.
So today we have Dr. Purita, who is our medical director here at Pureform, and we have Kevin Ferber, who is the COO of American Cell Technology. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So for those that don't know ACT, can you please give us just like the high level, what you guys do?
Sure, absolutely. We're the largest personal stem cell bank here in the U.S. So when I say personal, I mean autologous, only your cells for your body. We have American Cell Technology, which is our adult side of the bank, where we work with medical practitioners all over the U.S. We work with Dr. Purita here in Boca. And I would say of those adult clinics, the vast majority are sending in tablespoons of adipose. We also accept bone marrow samples, but I'm sure Dr. Purita will touch on as why we like adipose at our bank. But they'll send that sample priority overnight to our lab, and then we have an FDA registered and inspected lab that operates current good tissue practice, where our skilled lab techs will isolate the stem cells from your adipose or bone marrow, and then we'll be able to culture expand them naturally in our controlled environment, and then we will store those mesenchymal stem cells cryogenically stored in time for future regenerative use with your practitioner. And then separately, we have Vital Cells, which are newborn banking offerings. So that's more direct consumer to expecting parents, but we have a very similar offering for storage of their cord blood and cord tissue. Very different than any other cord blood, cord tissue storage facility out there, where we're actually isolating mesenchymal stem cells from those newborn samples, and we're able to naturally self-replicate those mesenchymal stem cells, count them, and cryopreserve them as well. So children will have access to their day one stem cells, hopefully for the rest of their life.
That's awesome. And then for those day one stem cells, can family members also use those, or is it only for that person?
We only recommend for autologous use. I think the FDA will tell you it's first degree relative, but I still don't think, and Dr. Purita is the expert here, but it's still foreign DNA. And I think if you want to call safety and efficacy, you really want to focus on the autologous cell lines that you only have your own DNA. And so really it's supposed to be used for the only child's use.
Got it. Yeah, and like you said, so you have clinics all over who are sending in either adipose tissue or bone marrow samples. We are one of those clinics. So Dr. Purita will do a small liposuction in a patient, and we'll send that adipose tissue over to you for some of our patients. And then he will either inject it into the joint, right, Dr. P?
We'll do it in joint. Sometimes we'll do it intravenously. A lot of times we'll do it both, because you get a systemic effect, and then you'll get a local effect in the joint.
Right. So yeah, we were just actually talking about doing it on my mom. We banked her cells a little bit ago. So she's going to come in a couple weeks and get it intravenously. She was asking Dr. Purita, should I also inject it in the joint? He said, be silly not to. Right, Dr. P?
Yes, correct.
And Kevin, what spurred you to get into this industry?
My background from out of college was more in economics, finance side of things. And I really just always had a passion in health and wellness. And over a decade ago, I started shadowing some of the most known stem cell doctors here in the U.S., and I found the industry fascinating on what we're actually seeing, some of the results they were seeing, and just seeing how suppressed it was. And so kind of had a goal to get into the regenerative medicine side of things, and we had this opportunity to start the bank here at American Cell Technology, and it has really met a unmet need. As we are humans, we're just made up of cells, and we're constantly depleting our cells. And so we have the opportunity to take out just a small sample of fat, which you might have 20 million cells in it, and we're able to self-replicate them into the billions and hopefully replenish these clients or your patients with their youngest cells in time to help for regenerative therapy.
That's awesome. Do you know how many patients you guys have treated so far, or how many people's cells you have banked?
Yeah, we have tens of thousands of clients.
Wow. And how long has ACT been in business?
A little over 5 years. And we have samples from about almost 9 years.
Wow, that's awesome. And Dr. P, can you explain a little bit how stem cells play a role in extending health span and improving overall longevity?
Well, first of all, you can't live but about 2 days if you don't have any stem cells. And, when I give some lectures, sometimes I have one slide, cells, not doctors, heal patients. And that really sums it up all. Now, now we're starting to see some new things about stem cells. What we're thinking is the stem cells are really helping to replace defective mitochondria. And that is probably going to be more prominent. Wouldn't you say, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be more prominent as we go on. It's not that the cell itself is repairing tissue, or I shouldn't say repairing, replacing tissue. It helps do that. It helps reduce inflammation, but it transfers the mitochondria that are defective. And we'll get into that in a little bit later on this little podcast.
And can you describe what the key differences are between banking your own cells, as Kevin was saying, using your own autologous cells versus receiving donor-derived cells from other sources?
Sure. One of the fallacies that we see out there is a lot of people that are proponents of the cells from other sources, and we call those allogenic, is that they are what we call immune privileged. Now, what does that mean? It means that your immune system is not going to attack them. On the contrary, those cells are not immune privileged. They're immune evasive. And there's a couple of reasons why. You must realize when you get these cells from someone else, or when you get your own, your cells have the mitochondria again. And there's a special mitochondrial DNA, and that comes only from your mother, not from your father. So if you start mixing cells with other types of, mitochondrial DNA, it's going to make the mitochondria work initially, but then it's like, maybe an analogy I can give you is you have a toy and you're putting a battery in that toy. The battery doesn't quite fit it, doesn't really work. It may work a little bit, but it's going to ruin the toy. Same thing with your mitochondria. Over a period of time, the mitochondria are not going to work as well as they would from your own cells. There's nothing as good as your own cells. There's no immunology problems or anything like that. So you're a much better steed there.
I would add, here in the United States, you're not going to be able to find an allogenic stem cell product that will give you a live cell count. A lot of these allogenic products out there will either be acellular, or if they are, let's say, an umbilical cord or cord tissue derived, they're not culture expanded or live cell counted. And I'd be hard pressed to ask you to get a live cell count on what you're actually getting.
Wow.
In defense of that, you are getting some growth factors from them, some exosomes, some good, some bad, but not live cells.
Absolutely.
And you guys were just discussing kind of the difference between stem cells and exosomes and the different results that you would get if you could compare, a perfect analysis between the two. Can one of you describe what an exosome is compared to a stem cell?
I'll let the professor take this.
Well, okay, professor. Yeah. Hey. All right. So basically, we used to think exosomes was basically cellular debris, junk. But they're not. They're little packages of what we call messenger RNA and other things. Actually, they're also part of some mitochondria and things like that. But they can give instructions to cells. They're like little instruction packets. And we think that's one of the ways that the stem cells do work, in that they secrete these compounds. And then these compounds start working with the cell membrane, and it starts giving the cell membrane instructions. And then the instructions go to the nucleus, and then the nucleus starts making certain compounds. So maybe the cell itself does what we call immune modulation. It gets the inflammatory response down. And that's why these cells work so good for inflammatory conditions, autoimmune conditions, and things like that, because it can solve that. Anything else, Kev?
Yeah, I think the simplest analogy I received once is that it's the messenger cell. So it's almost like your cell phone sending a text message to tell the stem cells what to do. And just from like a application standpoint, in mesenchymal stem cells, there are exosomes in there, right. But I think a lot of people have moved towards exosomes to get off of the term stem cells, right. And they are more acellular, and they have these growth factors and capabilities to help, to Dr. Purita's point, help repair.
It's interesting too, when you mention mesenchymal stem cells, if you look at the godfather, I should say, of all stem cells, Arnie Kaplan, he would say, MSCs are really not, MSCs meaning mesenchymal stem cells, really not stem cells. They're medicinal singling cells, just like sort of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back to American Cell Technology. Kevin, how do you guys ensure the quality, viability, and safety of stored stem cells over time? Because like you said, that's It's really important in this
No,
industry.
it's absolutely critical. And with that, and that's why we work with Dr. Purita and some of the best physicians out there, is because they have to trust the quality control and what they're giving back to their patients. And so we really try to go above and beyond standards. And so we have an FDA consultant that was with the FDA for 25 years that we work with pretty heavily, but have really stringent quality controls. We have a full quality team. So it really starts from receiving the sample. Mm-hmm. And what's the number one priority is that we don't mix samples at first, right? So really high quality controls. Every sample that comes in passes stringent quality standards, contamination tests, anaerobic, aerobic, endotoxin, mycoplasma testing. And if those don't pass those standards, we discard the sample. Once the sample comes in, and let's say it does pass those standards and we start the culture expansion process, what's really critical that not really talked about in just stem cell banking, not all stem cells even grown out at a bank are the same. It's really important on how you grow out these stem cells. And so we have very highly skilled lab techs that are trained through our customary SOPs and making sure we're not overgrowing these cells. What does that mean by overgrowing the cells? The cells really are growing out in plastic. And so there's only so much volume space for these cells to grow out. And if you let them overcrowd on each other, they'll become senescent and die and start eating away at each other. So it's really critical when we're growing out the cells to only growing out what we call 80-90% confluency of the plate to ensure these cells are really healthy. And then from there, we'll do our live cell count and viability counting before we cryopreserve those cells. And before we send cells back to physicians for their patients, we'll thaw those samples, confirm viability, live cell counts, and they'll have to pass all visual inspections and sterility testing before we send them out as well.
Wow, that's super interesting.
Now, one little comment. Now, Kevin was mentioning senescent cells. For those in the audience who are not familiar with these are like zombie cells. They should have died but didn't die, and they wreak havoc on your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could do more damage than benefit, right?
Yeah, that, and as we grow out cells, and I think the closest thing we have for cell health or telomere length in the cells. And so if you did go to, let's say, abroad, and maybe they're using one umbilical cord sample that they said is the golden cell that they mass produced, they could be growing those out hundreds of passages or 50s of passages, and you don't really know. What do I mean by passage? When you take one of the samples and regrow it to the next, that's passage 1, and you go and therefore it's passage 2. And as you start growing to various passages, not to the first 5 or 10 passages, there's a really significant difference. But if you're going out to the 10s and 50s or hundreds of passages, you could really start shortening the telomere lengths of the cells and the potential of these cells. So for our perspective, we're really conservative and only go out to passage 5 as well to maintain the inherent characteristics of the MSCs we receive.
Okay. Super interesting to know. And then, so we publicly worked on a patient together recently, Kayla Harrison, who is a world champion UFC fighter. So she was treating just her training, really, like the wear and tear on her body that she gets just from her training schedule, which is obviously most people are not going through that on a day-to-day, thankfully. What are the conditions that you are seeing a majority of patients looking to treat with cells?
I'd be curious on you guys are seeing this in the clinic here, but what's fascinating is that if anyone could go into Google Scholar and put in mesenchymal stem cells and pick a condition, and there might be a paper out there. I think there's over 7,000 or 8,000 trials going on right now, or studies going on, including mesenchymal stem cells. But unfortunately, I think in the US, we're doing a very poor job of putting out literature in the space. And so I think, we need to do a better job of that. But that leads me to say that we work with every type of practitioner, from orthopedic surgeons to urologists to neurologists to immunologists to plastics, because they've been doing mini lipo in their sleep. And it kind of runs the gamut if they're going to be treating. Yes, the orthopedic is probably the lowest hanging fruit because you either have your pain or you don't, but we do have a lot of people treating systemically for autoimmune conditions or neurological conditions as well.
Okay. Yeah, and then I was even talking to Alex on your team the other day about sexual health treatments, which I had never thought about before, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, that and aesthetics as well, hair regeneration. I for a while, people have been using PRP in the hair and seeing some minimal results. So now if you actually get the cells in there, it can help repair, rebuild some of your dormant hair cells potential as well.
Yeah. And how does your approach compare to offshore stem cell clinics? Like, what should patients be cautious about and if they are considering a treatment abroad? Yeah,
and full disclosure, I'm 100% biased. As being an autologous stem cell bank with your cells or your own DNA, I would say 95% of those offshore offerings will be some sort of allogenic offering that Dr. Purita talked about. So it'll be a foreign DNA line.
Right.
And Dr. Purita can talk a little more about those risks of that. Also, I think the currency you want to know is how many live cells you're getting when you're out there. I think a lot of them offer you this week retreat, but you're getting, let's call it 50 million cells, which the average consumer might not know if that's a lot, and so they should talk to you guys here at Pureform or Dr. Purita on what you think a normal treatment should be. But then they go through another few days of just getting PRP or scans, and then they're there spending tens of thousands of dollars, and they got very minimal amount of actual stem cell therapy.
Right.
So I think it's really critical to know what your source of cells you're getting, how many live cells you're getting. Is it your own cells or your own DNA? Are there any risks? Or you see some clinics saying that you need 4 or 5 day recovery timeline. Dr. Purita and I were just talking about that. If you're getting your own cells systemically with your own DNA, you should not have some sort of downtime. They talk about a 4-day recovery time where your cells are rebuilding themselves. That's an adverse reaction in my view. You should not have any of those reactions when you're getting your own cells back.
I think that's a big disclaimer for people to know that.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing you realize is when you get someone else's cells, you're also being exposed to whatever diseases they may have been exposed to, such as various viruses, things like pyrins, which are kind of things that you can't kill in the system no matter what, and they can lead to things like mad cow disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. So that's another precaution that, it kind of doesn't get in the literature there, and they don't give it to you in their advertising, but it's a very real risk.
Yeah, and there's only a handful of infectious diseases you can screen for, if I'm not mistaken,
Exactly.
for the hundreds that you might have.
And we all have viruses in our body, and as we age, the viruses become more and more numerous and cause inflammation.
And we'll probably talk a little bit like why do we think it's so critical to get autologous besides the safety part? But there's a lot of literature that talks about the autologous cells being welcomed. I know we talked about this probably about a year ago. When you're getting your own cells back, your body recognizes your own DNA and lets it stay in the body. And I think that's critical for regenerative medicine, is keeping the cells in the body. Even if you do not get an immune response, your body wants to reject foreign DNA. So there are studies showing that allogeneic cells will get expelled from the system more quickly than autologous as well.
Oh, that's super interesting. And once again, I think just really good for people to know, because I think this medical tourism concept is becoming more and more common for people to go overseas. And, I know we hear more about people going to Turkey for hair transplant and things like that. But like you said, there are these retreats, and I think it's really important for people to know what they may be getting themselves into as opposed to what they could be doing here in the U.S. It'll likely be more effective.
Yeah, not all of it's bad. And I think there's less marketing constraints when you're going abroad. Here, you have to be careful about how you market things, and that kind of restricts or big tech can restrict on how you market, where it could be a little different outside the country where you don't have to worry about certain U.S. standards.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for those that don't know, I guess I don't know why people would know unless they were trying to market like we are, right? But you can't say the term stem cell. We don't even say it on our website. You definitely can't use it in any ads on Google or social media or anything. So it is an interesting thing to try to get your name out there and try to get the right information out there when a lot is blocked, right?
Yeah, it is fascinating because there's no law saying you can't market for stem cells, but the big tech, which is Google, which consumes about 90% of advertising dollars, will suppress or not allow you to actually market for stem cells. But you turn on the news and big pharma is on every commercial.
Right. Dr. P, what have you seen with the patients who, or I guess let me take it back a step. What do you see the difference between using autologous cells same day and then autologous cells that have been banked? Do you use those two cells differently?
I've had experience with both. My feeling, and, a lot of things that I'm doing are basically cell therapies for joints. Now, to me, when I do a cell therapy for a joint, I think of the idea of a symphony orchestra. Not just a stem cell, but it's other cells called macrophages and another type of cells and hematopoietic stem cells that act all together. Now, a lot of times what I would do is I find if I do that same procedure where I may use bone marrow, I use a fat graft, and I use PRP. I also use some of the bank cells.
Oh, okay.
Results are better. Absolutely. I can tell you because I used to do a lot of cases in the Cayman Islands. We would basically get SVF, which is a process where we basically extract the mesenchymal stem cells and other cells from the fat. And I would use that with the bone marrow, and it was a great result.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's using them all together that you net the best result.
Again, I like the concept of the symphony because they all work as a symphony. That's why I'm not so convinced, and again, I think the cells are great, but just putting MSCs alone in the joint, I'm not sure how good that's going to work alone. Now, if I do it with other things, I'm really happy with it.
Okay.
What's your thoughts?
We've had doctors have fantastic results with just MSCs, and I think some of it could also be a quantity constraint sometimes, because I think we talked a little bit about this, but some people will say, okay, well, I use 10 million mesenchymal stem cells in a knee, but then I can use 40 billion exosomes or whatever it may be. And how do you quantify those?
I have no idea what those terms are.
Yeah.
I'm saying, what does that really mean?
Exactly.
I just pull these numbers out. Oh, I'm going to use 40 billion exosomes.
And then they name their own units. So their question is, like, if you're using 20 or 30 million mesenchymal stem cells, could that get you potentially the same result as, let's call, an SVF? Because I think the IRB protocols for an SVF, it's about 1 million mesenchymal stem cells per cc of fat. And there's other types of stem cells in there, so don't get me wrong. So trying to get more apples to apples, and I think you're starting to see that in the literature too, when people are trying to quantify the amount of cells. And you talked about this a little bit, orthopedic success stories. If you can get it locally to the joint, fantastic. If you can also run an IV as well to help the cells flow through to other sites of inflammation, you could even amplify the results.
Right. That's kind of how we were talking about in the beginning. Like you recommended for my mom to do the IV and inject them.
Because I found that always worked the best. Now, the other thing is, and I'm not sure what your thoughts are, you and I have talked about this in the past, what happens to the cells when they're given intravenously? Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts? And I'll give you my thoughts.
Yeah, my thoughts are that they're smarter than we are. They're anti-inflammatory by nature, and they'll hone in on sites of inflammation. We can't mark cells in humans, but we've seen some animal studies where cells are given and they're flying, the autologous cells are given to rats and they're flowing to sites of inflammation and staying there for days to come. I like to say you talk about medicinal signaling cells. And so, yes, still an argument if they're actually turning to cells, or what I would say is almost a general contractor, where they help the body repair itself. So whether they're calming inflammation, bringing in the good cells, or excreting the right growth factors to do so, they're playing that GC type role to get the body healthier. And they see that by the inflammation and helping repair.
And I think sometimes what happens, these cells actually work almost by dying. Because what happens, they undergo something called apoptosis, which is basically a cell death, but they get converted into other type of cells. One cell is called a Treg cell, which is sort of an immune cell, but it can do amazing things for reducing inflammation in the body. And I think that's what happens. I think some of the cells do get trapped in your lung and get converted to these other cells, which then go to the hinterlands and do their good jobs.
Yeah, and from my understanding, all the cells are going to come through your lungs first and get expelled. So if you did have some sort of lung condition or COVID, it's going to have to repair.
I told a patient the other day, I said, this is really going to help you if you do this. They had bad lung problems. I said, this will help. Yeah,
we've seen people come and have COVID and then get their cells IV and then feel like they're breathing, or had it previously, feel like they're breathing 110% the next day.
Wow. I mean, I would think that would be applicable for like a long COVID patient just dealing with that chronic inflammatory condition going on as well, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Dr. P, can you qualify like who would be a candidate for an orthopedic for people who don't know you, and you know who's a candidate for an orthopedic stem cell procedure versus not?
I mean, it depends, but I mean, age is somewhat of a limiting factor. When I start getting people in their mid 80s, I start questioning. But then again, if we do some culturing of cells, then it's a numbers game. If we can get the numbers greater, we're going to have a much greater chance of success. And then someone who's 85, I'm not as concerned because I can easily harvest their fat, send it to Kevin, and have his lab do the magic. And then we have some good results that way. But, people that have, certain other conditions like active infections, things like that, not a good idea. Maybe an active cancer, I have to depend on what kind of cancer they have. So, it's an individual thing. It's not, I can't really just make a blanket statement about that. Most people are a candidate for our procedures, though. For joints. Now, if I have a joint that's so disturbed and basically damaged, I may say, look, I don't think I can help you. You're just going to be, wasting your money.
Yes. You're very good. You're very honest with me.
No, I got to be. I have to sleep with myself at night. And I basically determine what I'm going to do on somebody if it was my own family. It's okay. If it was my own family, what would I do? And that's a really good way of doing things.
Right. Like you're known to tell patients when they need a joint replacement, just say this is going to be wasted.
I told a person today, I said, listen, in all honesty, why don't you just go get a cortisone injection first?
Okay.
Not usual, but once in a while I say that. I mean, that's my orthopedic background.
And that would be for like more of an acute injury?
Yeah, something that, is acute, and it's probably something that can easily be taken care of. Look, I'm not a big fan of cortisone, but once in a while, it can really come in handy.
Yeah, it has its purpose.
Exactly.
Okay. And then like a lot of people have dealt with, an ACL tear, a meniscus tear, a labrum tear in their shoulder. Would those types of people be good candidates?
The reason why they're good candidates is because a lot of those tissues are what we call avascular. They don't have really good blood supply. And the cells can help produce one. And that's why these people can do well with it. Those are ideal candidates for it.
Oh, great. Tell me about a success story recently. Have you had any patients that you've impressed yourself with their success?
I mean, I could lie to you. No, because I've been doing this for so long that I've kind of become blasé. I'm not impressed because they're doing well because I'm expecting it now.
Right. It's just standard of care now.
I'm kind of impressed when they don't do well, and that's usually few and far between. But I'm saying, I wonder why. But I have other tricks that I could try. And I'm like ozone gas and all kinds of things.
Right. And what are the statistics you usually tell people?
The statistics are basically, for knees are our most successful joint. I'd say we're probably around 85, 86% excellent result. An excellent result to me is about 75% better than the patient started.
Mm-hmm.
Hips and shoulders, not too far behind.
Mm-hmm.
And the backs, when we do the backs, and I'm very choosy about the back, but I like to do people that have degenerative arthritis, mainly back pain. We have very good results with that too.
Okay. Kevin, is that standard for what you see with the clinics that you guys work with?
Yeah, I think we need to continue to collect more data. And I think that becomes great marketing for the industry as well. But yeah, that all seems on par, especially from an orthopedic standpoint.
Yeah. And then what about, just because we do more orthopedics than we do systemic health, but do you have any impressive stories from the systemic health lens?
And maybe it's simple, but a lot of, we have some doctors that are just treating kind of body arthritis. And there's a ton of inflammation or people that have it in their hands, and it can be debilitating for these patients. And doctors are seeing great success with just administering the cells. And that could seem very simple to me and you, but a lot of people can't do day-to-day activities with systemic arthritis. And I think that's just a simple example of where doctors are seeing success stories systemically. But we do have physicians treating for neurological conditions, treating for autism, treating autoimmune such as Crohn's disease, and giving cells systemically just through IV.
How about for memory, for conditions like Alzheimer's and that kind of neurodegeneration?
Yeah, we have some people treating there. I mean, by no means is it reversing and curing this disease, but it could give a better quality of life. I'm curious, Dr. Purita, if you've treated many of them, but I'll give you an example. One of the doctors we work with up in Jersey, he just banked my parents, and my father's in his 70s and he's retired, and he had both my mom and dad in there, and he goes, can't wait to give your dad back his cells. Like, you're going to see a neurological improvement. And those are like this success. It might be small, but if you can get any sort of improvement, it's great.
It's huge.
Well, what are those diseases? A lot of them are neuroinflammatory diseases, meaning you have inflammation of the nerves. And again, a lot of them are mitochondrial diseases. So there you are. You can help replace some of those deficient mitochondria. May very well help. I mean, Alzheimer's is a hard thing because it's a multifaceted disease. We know that some of the problem is you're getting, unfolded proteins in there and things like that. So I'm not sure we're quite there yet, though.
Yeah, and if you are treating something like an Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, that's something you're going to need a significant amount of cells.
Well,
and I guess that's really where the bank comes in, because you couldn't really take enough fat off someone.
I think he is early.
Yes, and Dr. Purita kind of touched on it. If you get older, where do you age out from banking? And sometimes everyone's cells are different, potency or quality. And so, maybe in my father's standpoint, he might need more of his own cells than I may for the same condition. But I think that's something we still need to do more research on to figure out, as we're trying to quantify the dosing.
That's super interesting. Would it be the same as doing the cells same day that you would say, by the time you're in your mid-80s, maybe you've aged out, Dr. P? Or it really just depends on the person?
Again, it depends on the person. Just think about your own travels in life. You can see some people who are 80 and they're like totally with it. You see other people that are 65 and you say, oh my God, this guy's like, forget it.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. It's an individual thing. I mean, a lot of it is epigenetics, how you basically turn your genes on and off, and your lifestyle and things like that. I mean, are you willing to really go the extra to keep yourself young, or are you just kind of sitting around and not doing much, and that's going to make you age?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. We always talk about that. My husband's grandma just turned 90, and you've met his grandma, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she is like, in much better condition than most 80-year-olds. And I think it's just because she lives a very full, happy life. She had 10 kids. Like,
That'll keep you young.
It'll keep you young. Like, she's always been busy. She just got her second hip replacement. She's like flying around. So to walk it back a little bit, Kevin, can you walk us through, like, I guess at a high level, but step by step, what the lab banking and expanding process looks like?
So after you go through that mini lipo at your clinic, and that's done our local anesthesia. I know we filmed the procedure, and they could be in and out within under an hour to go back and drive their car. This isn't a full anesthetic. So once we get that tablespoon of fat, we will be in a clean room environment. Our lab techs will isolate the actual cells from the fat sample, and then we'll plate them into these three-dimensional plastic plates. Mesenchymal stem cells like to adhere to plastic. We'll then put we'll call stem cell food or media and a mixture of nutrients to help these cells grow. And so we'll put these plastic plates into incubators and controlled environments, and then we'll monitor these cells over the coming weeks as they start growing out and expanding on these plates. Our lab techs will check the plates every few days and check for cell growth. And once it gets to be about that 80% or so confluency or grow out on those plates, we'll remove them from the plates. We'll do our cell counting. Viability counting, then we'll decide if we need to regrow more or we can cryopreserve them. In conjunction, we'll also be doing all of our sterility testing as well and contamination testing to ensure it passes all of those tests before we cryopreserve those samples. Then those samples are individually packaged into 2 milliliter cryovials, and each one of those vials has 10 million live mesenchymal stem cells. From there, they're then frozen in minus 190 degrees centigrade, which effectively metabolically suspends the cells in time.
Wow. And then they're frozen indefinitely, right? People don't have to use them within a certain number of years or anything like that?
Yeah, we have over 70 years of data of that, so of how we're cryopreserving the cells. But when we actually thaw the samples as well, we confirm viability and cell count. So if there was, by chance, any sort of cell die-off, we'd grab other vials to ensure that they have the same quality of cells they expected.
Okay.
One thing I might comment on, you kind of mentioned it a bit. You can get the cells either from the bone marrow or from the fat. Now, the reason why we prefer fat is because, believe it or not, fat is typically the richest source of mesenchymal stem cells in the body, especially as we age. So that's why we prefer fat rather than bone marrow.
Yeah, and we see it in our lab. When we are getting a bone marrow sample from an adipose sample, the cells from the adipose take off a lot more. It takes us a lot longer, and we'll have to grow out the bone marrow samples most likely in a smaller plate because there's going to be a less amount of stem cells. And so if you think conceptually, if you put a small amount of stem cells in a large plate, it's going to be too big for them to grow out. So we have to start them in a smaller plate. It will take us a lot longer. We'll have to spend a lot more time in because they tend to be more stressed in older cells.
Interesting. And then Dr. P, is there a big difference between, like, I know there's white fat and brown fat, the difference between somebody who's got a lot of fat on their body as opposed to somebody who's very lean?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I've talked about that a number of times in my lectures. So brown fat is basically fat that has a lot more mitochondria. It's the healthy fat. White fat is not quite as healthy. Now, as far as the mesenchymal stem cells are concerned, if you have your choice, I'd rather have brown fat than white fat, but it's very difficult to really find pockets of brown fat. There are little pockets here and there in the body. Babies have a lot of brown fat, and then as we get older, the brown fat kind of disappears. But the other thing you must realize also is and maybe Kevin, you can speak on this a little more, the type of person that we get the fat from really has a difference as far as the cell profiles are concerned. Someone who's obese is going to have a number of cells that can be very inflammatory, and even some inflammatory mesenchymal stem cells. Now, how do you guys, that's the one question I don't know. How do you kind of separate out in mesenchymal 1 versus mesenchymal 2? That's one, a mesenchymal 1 is a kind of stem cell that can really cause inflammation, whereas a 2 is the one we usually want.
We're doing annual external and internal validation. So we'll send out samples on how we culture expand, and we'll send 2 external labs to do CD markers and validations that we are getting MSCs. From your point on the different types of patients from fat versus skinnier patients, what we tend to see is that those skinnier patients have healthier cells or MSCs versus adipocytes. Yeah. And so I think one of the bigger questions from a practitioner is, this person's too lean, I can't get more than 10 cc's of fat. Is that enough cells to grow out? And
typically it is, because like I tell patients, remember now, when you gain weight or lose weight, your fat cells either get bigger or smaller. They don't really increase in number.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get, a 10 cc sample from a healthy athlete could have more MSCs than a 20 cc sample from an obese person.
Right. I remember with Kayla, we had to time it with her training because obviously for fighting, she gets so lean that she would get to a point where we wouldn't be able to take enough fat off of her. Right?
Yeah. And she's a one of a kind, but usually Dr. Purita would tell you not to go back to grapple fighting. But I think right after her extraction, the next day she was sparring.
Yeah.
And same thing when she gets them back too. We tell, calm down, take it easy, use common sense, but it's sometimes not common.
I guess at least she's not drinking after the cells.
True. Yeah, she's definitely not drinking. But yeah, we have had to time her infusions very specifically because she's when she's training for a fight, she's training 3 times a day. And even when she's not actively training, she's doing cardio. And Dr. Bree's like, I really need you to rest after this. What do you guys think the biggest misconceptions about stem cells are?
Mine would be that people use the word stem cells as a blanketed cross-regen medicine. It ends up taking down sometimes the quality of work that some great practitioners or people who are actually working in the stem cell space. If you hear the word stem cells, the average consumer might think PRPs, platelet-rich plasma stem cells.
Oh, that's PRP, right? And I said, no, that's basically that. I tell them it's the garden concept. You have fat acts as a scaffold, but it's also the source of seeds. So the scaffold is also the soil and the seeds, and then the fertilizer is the PRP.
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. But the average consumer, they'll say an amniotic fluid or an acellular product is stem cells. And even with stem cells, you want to know where it's coming from, where it's sourced. Is it your own? Are there live cells? And I think that's the biggest misconception is that there has been media that tries to bring down the stem cell industry or say, are you using embryonic stem cells? I don't think people have used embryonic stem cells since the 80s.
Never.
And now there hasn't been there still comes up though. It's 2025 and there's questions on ethical concerns. And no one's been using fetus stem cells for 25, 30 years.
Right.
In the US anyway.
What do they use when they're using, it's like umbilical cord, right? Or no?
Yeah, so that'd be post-birth product. So that's, we even consider that at the lab adult stem cells. It's post-birth, and so even at Vital Cells, we do take umbilical cord blood and cord tissue, and we'll just get the MSCs. Most of those umbilical cord products, though,
Wharton's jelly.
Yeah, Wharton's jelly, or they could be minced up. If you don't, the issue with those, you could have some great growth factors, and it's day 0 or day 1 regenerative therapies, but the issue is really there's such a finite amount of stem cells in that cord blood, cord tissue. They got on average 1 to 3 million live cells in the cord tissue, and on average about 1 million cells of mesenchymal stem cells in the cord blood. So if you don't have the opportunity to culture, expand, and amplify, there might not be a use case for it besides maybe a small child one time.
Right. And you walked us through the process for the adult cells. Is the process for the newborn cells the same for banking?
From a parent perspective, it's same as any other cord blood or cord tissue storage facility that's been around for 35 plus years. And so you'll receive a kit. You'll have a cord tissue collection cup and a cord blood bag. Every delivering medical practitioner knows the process. It's very basic. So they would just bring that to the hospital. They would notify their delivering physician or wherever they're giving birth, notify their delivering physician of they're collecting at least the cord tissue, and we allow them to send in both the cord blood and cord tissue. And from us, it gets to our lab, and our processing is pretty similar on how we're isolating the MSCs. It does take longer because there's a smaller amount of cells that actually come in. And so to grow out a newborn sample could take us a little lengthier of time.
Okay. So for adult cells, it's like 4 to 6 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 6 weeks. And newborn, no one's using their cells in the first few months of birth anyway. So say a couple months.
Okay. And have you gotten any exciting success stories from people who have used their newborn cells?
We're newer in the newborn side, and I think if we had millions of newborn samples, we would have had more people using them. I think there's more of the I wish we had. And so one of the doctors we deal with in Colorado was saying that he was treated an adolescent patient that fell into the pool and was drowning, and he wished he had his own cells banked, because then if you don't have them banked and something like that happens, what do you have to do as a doctor? You have to schedule them. If you did want to use stem cell therapy, you got to schedule them. They come in for a procedure. Then they can get stem cells, and then they can go through, if they want to bank, a process for 2 months later. So I think what's really critical for that is just having the capability to have your own cells off the shelf. And I'm sure Dr. Purita can talk about that. But acute injuries or when something happens, how do you think, Dr. Purita, about how critical is it to get your cells as soon as possible versus waiting.
Now, the sooner the better, because you're going to repair the damage in the cells. You're going to repair the mitochondria. You're going to give the cell a chance to survive. That's very critical, that those first hours even typically can make it. It's just like anything else, like a patient who has a heart attack or a stroke. The time is of the essence.
Yeah, and from an orthopedic side, what we hear from orthopedic guys is that you really want to beat the scar tissue if you can and calm the inflammation, because scar tissue ends up being a Band-Aid and increases the risk of re-injury. So if we have these capabilities, potentially repairing the body naturally, might be able to repair it more so to decrease the chance of re-injury.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know how important it was. Like the timing of it was so important.
Well, maybe Dr. Purita can talk to this, but like when there is scar tissue, if it's fully scarred out, it's really tough for the cells to do their job. And I think there's a couple studies out of Asia that were looking at paralyzed spinal cord patients and breaking up the scar tissue to inject cells. Because if you have an area that's completely all scarred up, the cells aren't going to be able to get in there to do their job.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And what we find is when they do have the fibrosis like that, it's kind of encased in senescent cells also. So you want to get rid of the senescent cells and then give them cell therapy. So absolutely the case there.
Super, super interesting. I know this is a rapidly growing industry. What are you excited about in the next 5 to 10 years to come in terms of stem cell science?
I think what's most fascinating to me is that, the most archaic time we are in stem cell therapy is today. And there are already so many different powerful success stories and use cases. And so 5 and 10 years, I would hope in 10 years that this could be potential insurance offering. Right now, this is very much cash pay, but there are opportunities for people to understand where cell therapy plays a role in preventing some surgeries or preventing some foreign objects in the body. And what I think we have the opportunity to, at least from us at the bank, is you can store your youngest cells today, and that could be your insurance policy for the future on what changes in the world, whether down the road there is different modalities that could alter your cell lines, that could maybe make them even more potent or beneficial. And so I think that's super exciting on how we can continue to promote personalized cell therapy and what that looks like. And I think the starting block of your garden is having your own cells banked to see what they can do in 5 and 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell patients, my job is to basically buy you 5 or 10 years, because the way technology is going, I can't really give you a new knee now or a new hip now, but maybe in 10 years, it may be something we just take from the cupboard, inject it into the joint, and in 6 months you have a brand new joint. So that's the way, and that's what makes this exciting. This is an exciting field. Almost every other field in medicine, it's kind of, there's a little improvement here and there, but nothing tremendous. This is a field that we can, it's the sky's the limit as to what we can do.
Yeah. The more partners that Kevin gets, the more accessible these cells become, or banking their cells become, to people all over the country. I mean, you guys work with a good number of doctors now, but like we were saying, because it can be a little bit challenging to market this stuff, I feel like it's more of that word of mouth marketing, and the more people know about it, the more accessible it becomes. And
I think some of the best things about working in this industry, I really feel it is a collaborative environment, and we're all on the same page, and physicians don't feel competitive by nature. I think there's a lot more resource sharing and cross collaboration, and that's really how this industry does move forward. And so I'm excited to start more promoting our physicians to kind of get behind some data collection so that we can have a bigger consortium of data together, because that's really how we grow, and kind of having these great physicians that will speak to others and share their knowledge, and that's how other doctors get interested and share their experiences.
Yeah, research and data is the biggest thing I feel like that we're all trying to just gather as much as we can, because it's difficult, but the more we all come together, the easier it gets. In terms of lifestyle, are there things, I guess this would be for Dr. Purita, are there lifestyle factors that people can kind of control prior to, whether it be banking their stem cells or just doing a same-day autologous stem cell procedure, that would make their cells healthier? I guess we talked about the fact that, like Kevin said, skinnier people's cells tend to be a little bit more healthy. Anything else?
Yeah, I think, again, trying to detox your body.
Okay.
For instance, we do a procedure here, EBO2, where it gets rid of a lot of, toxins in the body, viruses, molds, etc., which can cause inflammation. So anything you can do that. Another thing that people don't like to hear about, but is really minimize your alcohol intake or cut it out completely, because alcohol can have a significant effect, especially on the bone marrow aspect of things. So I tell people, look, don't drink if you can avoid it. And, healthy lifestyle, again, epigenetics, where we can turn those genes on or turn them off depending on our lifestyle. I think supplements have a play on it. I think you want to make sure that you have enough NAD in your body. NAD is a nicotinamide adenine nucleotide. It's a coenzyme that all the cells need to make energy. And if those cells are not making energy, they're not going to be healthy. Again, it boils down to the mitochondria, as I've said in many different avenues, that really the health of your mitochondria is going to determine your health and the health of your stem cells. And your health is dependent on the health of your stem cells.
Very well said. Anything else? I mean, it's all kind of one and the same, but anything else you'd recommend for people to enhance their health span and longevity alongside utilizing regenerative medicine?
To Dr. Purita's point, when people are getting their cells back, the recommendation is not to consume alcohol, because what is alcohol? You're just inflaming your body. And I think most of us are chronically inflamed anyway. And so if you can reduce that intake, but it's tough. I'm sure Dr. Purita can talk more on it, but it's not an overnight transition. So some people will come in and say, oh, Dr. Purita, I want to bank my stem cells. What can I do for the next 2 weeks to make my stem cells better? It's not a 2-week process.
It's not a 2-week process. I'd say move to Antarctica. And then maybe you're going to be away from some of the toxins we have in our environment. That's the problem. A lot of this inflammation is caused by the things we're exposed to.
Yeah.
Be it Roundup or whatever. I mean, these things all cause, look at the microplastics. I mean, and now you keep hearing all these, I don't know if it's true or not, how, some of the jets, we know actually they're causing pollution and we're breathing that in. So there's all sorts of things that are attacking our body. We're constantly under attack.
And luckily from the banking side of things, there's not usually a person's sample we can't grow out. Luckily, you do have some healthy cells usually sitting dormant in your fat. And so no matter if you need more fat from someone versus less, luckily we do most time have the capabilities to at least be able to bank them.
Right. Okay. Anything else you guys would like to include for the people today about what to know about banking their stem cells and working with ACT?
They should reach out to Pureform and Dr. Purita and just to better understand. And I think what's from the benefit of working with some of the best physicians around the country is kind of what you talked about in the beginning of Dr. Purita, is that he'll give you an honest read because he treats people like they're his family. Right. And I think that's the most fun about being in the space, is that you get to choose to work with some of the best practitioners in the U.S. and they'll give you a real honest read to see if they can help you. And I'm sure your laundry list goes on of some of your amazing success stories that you no longer deem amazing because you expect them.
You kind of, you get blasé about it. But, when all is said and done, you really feel good deep down. You say, wow, that's good. They really got better. Now, but we expanded ourselves now. Now, like I say, we're just starting to do plasmapheresis, and I'm really looking forward to that, to see how we're going to make an improvement there. And then it just keeps going on, and who knows what the next big thing is going to be here in Pureform.
Yeah.
And something I don't know what yet.
And we're just looking to be a tool in your tool chest.
And you are
in place.
More than a tool. I wouldn't call you a tool. It's more than that, okay?
The starter pack.
Starter pack, okay? The rescue pack.
Yeah. Jet fuel, yeah. Yeah, no, I'd say it's, obviously our practice was really built on Dr. Purita practicing regenerative medicine, and this is just taking it to another level. It's just, it's what he was talking about 5 years ago. This was the advancement then. There will be a new advancement 5 years from now. So yeah, I know we've had a lot of patient success so far. So I look forward to getting even more people in and getting them to, I really want to bank my cells. So we'll have to do that one day soon.
Absolutely.
So like you said, for patients to reach out about banking their stem cells, they can reach out to Pureform. If they are interested in reading more about American Cell Technology, where's the best place to find information?
They can go to our website at americancelltechnology.com, or if they Google us, they can call our office. If they're not local to here and they're somewhere else in the U.S., we're happy to provide them a physician based on their specialty. If they're not willing to travel, or if they have a certain condition where they want a specialist, we can recommend some physician in our network to learn more.
Okay, awesome. And you guys are at a lot of conferences lately. I think you said you're going to be at Eudaimonia at the end of the year, right?
Yep, we'll be next to you guys there. And so if there's a way we can get people banking their stem cells there, we'd love to work with you guys to give patients access to this while they travel in. He'll be in and out within 45 minutes. Well, with Dr. Purita's hands, maybe 20 minutes.
Nah. we give it some.
Depends how lean they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This was super informative.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by Pureform, a comprehensive wellness center in Boca Raton, Florida. The website is pureformhealth.com, or you can find us on Instagram at pureformhealth. Feel free to message us with any questions, and note that you can connect with our providers for consultations over Zoom, from everything from stem cell therapy to hormone replacement therapy and peptide therapy. That's it for this episode of the HealthSpan Collective. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and send it to a friend. We'd also love to connect with you on Instagram. Follow the podcast at HealthSpan Collective and me at Nicole J. Doran, and leave us a comment on our latest post letting us know what you'd like us to cover next.